This is Micornus, the leader and the founder of the Church Governance Solutions. Today, I want to deal with a topic that is very sensitive as well. And last week, you might remember that we dealt with a topic that spoke about managing a church after the death of a visionary. Now, today we thought let's just visit the topic that speaks about managing a church after the death of the pastor's spouse or the visionary spouse. And this is very, very important that we deal with this. After dealing with the topic of last week, there's been a lot of demand. There's a lot of inboxes that we had that people advised that we speak also on managing a church after the death of the pastor's spouse. And this is the topic that we're going to embark on today. I'm sure is a lot of information that we can give about. But today we want to confine it to slightly shorter and just to very important facts, particularly just immediately after the death, and also just running the church just not long after the death of a spouse of a pastor. And that's what we want to confine it to. And I believe that this will be helpful for you as well. Now, the first thing that we want to speak about when a pastor has lost a wife, or maybe it's a woman pastor that has lost their husband, and the spouse have died at the particular time of this pastor's life. This is exactly what we want to speak about today, that how do we manage a church thereafter? Now, the first thing is that the congregation should acknowledge the fact that the pastor is part of a family first before being a part of the church. Now, this is a very important statement that I want to just start with, that we should acknowledge as a congregation that the pastor is actually a member of his own family or her family before they are a member of us as a congregation. And that's a very profound statement, because it's very important then to know that if we understand that, we will actually allow the family space to mourn and to mourn their loved one, and to make sure that we take instructions from them on how to handle everything else during this time. Now, I want us to look at it this way, that the pastor's wife or the visionary's wife or the visionary's husband, because it may be that the pastor is a woman, it is very important that we take that moment of death to be very succinct, to be very, very much very sensitive, rather, to them as individuals. Because this is actually a very sensitive moment to lose a spouse, particularly as a visionary, who is not only looking at the family line, but you're looking at the vision itself. You had somebody who was part of this vision as well. So, but it's very important, as I said, that the congregation, which is part of the pastor's life, of course, and we acknowledge that. And it's important as well to acknowledge that the congregation is very important. But the fact here is that the congregation should actually take the lead from the family. In other words, the family should be the ones who are leading in decision making in this regard. So they must actually be able to say how should they be comforted as a family. They want to also say how are they going to conduct their own mourning period. So we cannot decide as a congregation on and prescribe on how things should be done, but the family knows exactly what they want to do. So they know how to mourn their own loved one. And they also know how to run the progress of how the mourning period should go and how they're mourning their loved ones. So they know exactly what to do. So therefore, it's very important that the congregation then take a leaf out of that and give them space to mourn in their own way. Give them space and take only instructions from the family on what they want the congregation to do. Take information from or instructions from the family on how they need the congregation to get involved. So this is very important that we emphasize that. Now, I want to also say arrangements of prayers should also be organized through the family. Because sometimes it's easier for us as a congregation to say, now our pastor has lost a wife or our pastor has lost a husband, and we rush by organizing, let us go tonight and pray with them. It's very important that you find out from them if they are comfortable with the prayer, with prayer meetings ran in their own house. Because it may be that they would love us to run prayer meetings, not at their home, but in the church itself. So, because they don't want people to be coming to their home. So, this is very important that we emphasize that as well. Let's not assume that they want us to come to their home to run prayer meetings. Remember that there's no distance in prayer. Of course, we can actually pray with them while we pray from the church, from the basis of the church. But it may be that they need only maybe their leadership that would come and pray with them, not the whole congregation. So all those dynamics are going to be decided by the family, not by the congregation. And we emphasize that as church governance solutions because sometimes as congregations, we cross the line because we think that this is our pastor, we own him, this is our pastor, we own her, and we think that because they are part of us, then we can make decisions for them. Remember that when somebody has lost a spouse, they still have a brain to think. They still have emotions, actually, that they are nursing themselves. They can still make decisions of their own, of what they need and what they don't need. So therefore, the congregation cannot step in and take charge completely and make decisions that may need to be made by the pastor himself or herself, or even just the family of the pastor. So that is very, very key. So prayer meetings are not obvious. That's number one. Number two also is they are not obvious that they must be held at the pastor's house. It might be that they would love that to be done at the church. They might say we need only the leadership of the church to come and pray with us, not the whole congregation. And that must be emphasized. The other thing that's very important is that the family need to decide if memorial service is to take place and when and where. This is very important. And the family need to decide on that. Because we cannot also decide that we must now have a memorial service of the pastor, and while the family is not in approval of that, while the family doesn't even want a memorial service to take place. So that must be done in consultation with the family as well. And also the venue of that memorial service must be in consultation with the family. And I must go further to say the program of the memorial service must be also with consultation as well of the family, because there are several people that they may want them to speak. There are people that they may not want them to speak in that particular memorial service. It is their memorial service, of course. We must remember that, so we cannot decide for them. And that's very key. The other thing that I want to emphasize is not only the memorial service, but the funeral itself. When the funeral will take place, where should the funeral take place is the decision of the family, not the decision of the congregation either. So therefore, the congregation can only hear from the family on how they're going to run their funeral. So therefore, the program also of the funeral should actually be ran through the family, or it must come from the family rather. And it must be coming from the family to the congregation. And they must actually be the family taking the lead so that they can actually tell the congregation who they want to speak in this particular funeral. And this is very, very important. It's not obvious that the congregation know who must speak in that funeral as well. Conversations should be held by leadership of the church with the pastor for clarity and directions on how to handle the congregation in the meantime. Remember, at this particular time, the family has lost a loved one in this case. And then the church has lost a loved one, because if this is a wife of our pastor, we have lost a loved one. If it's the husband of our pastor, and we have lost a loved one. But the conversations must be between the leadership and the pastor himself or herself to discuss on how the congregation should be handled, how the church should be handled at that particular time. Announcements as well from the beginning of the death should be in a formal way. And who must announce that and when and how is very important as well, that the announcement is done in a proper manner. So those type of things, they become very sensitive as well. And we need to be cognizant of that and respect the space for the family to make their own decisions. There's another thing that I want to emphasize: decisions on how long the pastor sits off from the pulpit, sits away from the pulpit and without taking the pulpit. That decision must be decided by the pastor himself or herself. That cannot be decided by the leadership of the church. That cannot be decided by assistant pastors. It must be decided by the senior pastor himself or herself on when they feel they are ready to step up to the pulpit. In this regard, remember, they might actually organize someone from outside, another pastor, who would come maybe pastor the church for a while they're still sitting before they go to the pulpit. And also, they might also say, okay, I've got good assistant pastors that would run the church while I'm sitting down. Or else they may say, okay, I'm having one individual in the church, which is the one assistant pastor, that will continue with running the church while I'm sitting down. And the duration is not prescribed. How long should the pastor sit down is not prescribed. So therefore, we cannot say then the pastor has sat down enough. We cannot say for 2 months, for 3 months. It depends on the feeling of the pastor, whether they feel healed and strong to stand up, or when they feel the courage actually to stand up again and be able to take over on the pulpit and minister again. That's very key. And we're emphasizing this one because that's another thing that many people get confused with. The other thing that we mentioned as very important from Church Governance Solutions is that the church should not take the lead on deciding who should help with domestic chores in the pastor's house. The church cannot take the lead in deciding who must go and do the washing of the family, who must go and clean the house and cook for the pastor, for instance. We have seen in other churches where it is like a standard procedure, where when the pastor has lost a wife, for instance, they will actually send the sisters and rotate week by week. One goes and clean and washing this week and cook for the pastor this week. The following week is somebody else. The following week is somebody else. And they've made it as a procedure. And that cannot be, because if you make that as a procedure, it should not be the decision of the congregation. That decision should come from the family as well, because there might be some people in the family that would do that chores and that role, not the church itself. And that is very important, that the church steps back, the congregation steps back, and take a clue from or a cue from the family on what they want to do. If the family want to hire a domestic worker to come and help, or they want to have one of the relatives to do, that's very important. If they want the church to be involved as well, they can actually say that. It's something that the church or the congregation cannot decide on. Finally, one crucial one is this. There's no pressure that should be applied on the pastor on whether to remarry or not. And this is very important. And I'm emphasizing this because you'll find people already running skelter shekels and by skelter helters, whereby people are actually worried on when is the pastor going to get married. And they start talking. Is the pastor going to get married anyway? Is the pastor going to remarry again? And things like that. Those are unnecessary talks in the church. Please give the pastor a space of himself or herself. They will decide if they want to remarry. And that's not the decision of the congregation. It's not a decision of some members of the church. And it's something that must be an individual decision on the pastor's side. And he's got no obligation at all to report to anybody or to report to the congregation as well. So please, let's be away from the space whereby we're trying to dictate or put pressure on a pastor when to marry and so on. We've had people starting to calculate how many years a pastor should stay before they marry and things like that. That is the decision purely from the pastor himself or herself, whether they want to get remarried anyway or not, because that cannot be obligatory. So they may decide, I'm not marrying again. That's okay as well. If they want to marry again, that's okay as well. And whoever they marry, let it not be the dictating part from the church as well, because there are times where you find churches that will set up sisters and put them in line for the pastor to choose from. That is evil and that is wrong. You cannot do that. So please allow the pastor space of actually deciding when they want to get married, if they want to get married again, because that is not obligatory as well. They may decide, I'm not getting married anymore, or they may decide, I'm getting married, and when is their own time, not the congregation decision. I want to end up here today. Your host, Micornus, Phokane, the leader and the founder of Church Governance Solutions. We hope this topic, following up the one last week that we spoke about, the loss of the visionary, Very, very important that we came up to this. And may the good Lord bless you. But before we check out, we want to remind you of our YouTube channel, please, under Young Men Empowerment Forum and Micornus Phokane. So please subscribe, click notification button there. Like our Facebook page, Micornus Phokane, and our Facebook page, Church Governance Solutions. And make sure that you follow us on those pages. Click notification button as well. Our TikTok account, full of videos that we've posted in the past as well. They might be helpful for you. And I believe that the good Lord will bless you as you follow us on those platforms. Allow me to check out right now and say cheers for now.